Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment. That's going to be Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio. Megan, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, happy Friday, guys.
Oh, happy Friday is right. This has been the longest week of my life here as the market's gyrating around. But want to get into a discussion about Airbnb. It's kind of outperformed so far this year, but still at low levels and still off all-time highs. What kind of data are you seeing for Airbnb? Because I get it. It's a pandemic winter. People wanted to get away and they didn't want to go to hotels, or they couldn't go to hotels. A lot of them shut down. But now that things are opening up, and it seems like hotel prices are skyrocketing because demand's there, what's that looking like for Airbnb as far as sentiment data goes?
Yeah, so this was a fun one that we wanted to bring to you guys because this is actually one of those instances of kind of divergence developing in our data where we see significant strength building in Airbnb. Whenever we look at consumer demand, so mentions of people who are talking about booking with an Airbnb on a 90-day moving average, those mentions are about 25% higher year over year. And a lot of that is driven by now consumers are starting to, go to hotels in urban areas, and they're even starting to travel internationally. But I think what's interesting is that, this shows you that 90-day moving average growth rate, which is a longer term lens. And then when we narrow in and when you look at how Airbnb is performing versus peers on, a shorter lens, a 30-day moving average, that growth rate is actually higher than 50% year over year. So this booking rate for Airbnb is accelerating, and it's not just accelerating, it's accelerating quicker versus peers. And so I think this was a case where, last fall, whenever we started to look at this, whenever travel really started to open back up, we saw a lot of comparative strength out of these traditional hotel names who had been, so weak previously because of the pandemic. And now we're starting to see kind of that pendulum swing more in Airbnb's favor. And, in general, all travel in our data, we see a lot of pent-up demand. We see a lot of people who are talking about getting out there and traveling. So all of these names that are listed are showing this year-over-year growth, but Airbnb seems to be excelling, and it seems to be accelerating even in this past month. So it was one that definitely caught our eye, and we wanted to bring to discussion to see what you guys think as well.
Megan, when I look at Airbnb, my first question is, who's their competition? On your purchase versus sentiment, you've got all hotels and then Airbnb, which if I'm getting compared to hotels and I'm Airbnb, I really like that comparison because I'm out there on my own. And what surprises me, because it was here first, was VRBO. Are you getting any data from a place like VRBO? Are they any competition to Airbnb at all? Or is the competition here simply between hotel room, Airbnb? Is that the real competition that's going on?
No, I think that there's competition on both sides. We definitely see some strength out of VRBO. I don't think we don't see the level of strength that we're seeing out of Airbnb at the moment. There are other, brands within these larger aggregators like Expedia and Booking. I think there's a HomeAway. There are these other Airbnb-esque names. They're just not as large when it comes to a sample size, and they're not getting as much traction when it comes to just, consumers wanting to talk about them. But they're definitely there, and they're definitely an option that consumers have. I think that Airbnb's saturation is just really large. And, one thing that we're noting too is it's not just this demand increase for Airbnb, but we're also seeing some sentiment improvements. I like this hotel comparison because this kind of showcases that in general, this traditional hotel, there is a value proponent of going to a hotel and having services, and some people like that. So I think it's good to see that, Airbnb hasn't necessarily caught up. It's not necessarily operating at the level of the, traditional hotel industry, but we have seen improvements, whereas previously people would talk about maybe hidden fees and things of that nature. It looks like they're starting to improve on some of those things because, anytime you see happiness improve 4 points alongside an uptick in demand mentions, that's pretty rare, at least in our data.
Yeah, and let's get this right, guys. It's Vrbo. It's not VRBO anymore. They pronounce it Vrbo. That is the term now. But Expedia owns them, Megan. So they're kind of folded into that company, and Expedia and Booking, they've been doing really well. And a lot of Airbnb, as far as numbers go, they're beating estimates and numbers that they had in 2019 at the height of their expansion here. But when you look at these companies, I noticed on the splatter chart that the positive mentions are lower for Airbnb, and that sticks out to me because the last couple times I tried to book Airbnbs, I ended up not going with them because the fees were ridiculous, and then I just ended up getting a nice hotel room for about the same price. I just didn't want to pay all the fees. Is that why you're seeing a little bit less of positive sentiment compared to the hotels?
Yeah, you're not alone. I think a lot of people start to go through the process and then they realize that by the time they're booking, their total cost is doubled versus what the, listed price per night stay was, what they anticipated that they thought that was going to cost. So I think that, that is one area, as well as just the service offerings that traditional hotels provide that Airbnb doesn't. A lot of times when you go stay in an Airbnb, you still have to, strip your sheets and, get your towels together. You're doing a little bit more of the maintenance that you don't necessarily have to do at these traditional hotels. So that gap, I think, is to be expected, but Airbnb is starting to close the gap. So I think that's a good sign. Another value prop that Airbnb offers, just, from an anecdotal perspective, last weekend I stayed in a tree house via Airbnb. I don't know that any of the hotel names on that scatter plot would have had that type of a exotic offering for someone. So I think that that's one area that Airbnb has previously thrived, is in these non-urban areas and unique dwellings, unique experiences, and even in these long-term stays. That's another macro trend that we see start to propel or supporting Airbnb demand, is that a lot of consumers are able to continue to work remotely. And so a lot of people are saying, okay, well, I'd rather work remotely from this amazing location in this, somewhere that feels like a home to me. But whenever I'm not working, I can go, hang out at the beach afterward or something like that. So this is just one of those instances where, I think whenever you look overall, Airbnb shares are trading down about 15% year to date, but we're seeing, definite improvement in consumer demand. So this is one of those instances where we think maybe the market may be undervaluing Airbnb. And so it's definitely on our radar.
Kev, did you have another question?
Yeah, Megan, first and foremost, boy, Megan, I didn't peg you for a treehouse girl. Very interesting turn of events here. I've got to change my whole scouting report on you going forward. Megan Brantley, treehouse girl. Interesting take. Now, here's my question, Megan. The size of Airbnb on your plot here, they don't own anything, right? They don't own real estate like Hilton and Marriott and Hyatt does. How can this company be so big, so much bigger than these other hotel chains when they don't own anything, Megan? How are you getting to that circle being so big on your plot?
I think a lot of it has to do with, just the way consumers mention things. A lot of times, if you're booking a hotel, you might just talk about booking a hotel. You may not necessarily mention the hotel specifically, but if you're staying at an Airbnb, that's somewhat of a different, a unique experience. So now Airbnb has almost become genericized in a way that Uber has as well. So I think that has to do a little bit with the volume that you see there. And also just because, Airbnb is a relatively new concept. I know it's been around for a couple of years now, but who would have thought a decade ago that, we would be signing up to stay in other people's homes that was, operated by this middleman of Airbnb. I think that there's still that novelty that consumers are talking about, even though it's become more mainstream, certainly in the last couple of years. But I know obviously Airbnb isn't reporting earnings this week, but just to give scale, we still track those scores. So if Airbnb were to be reporting earnings this week, it would have a score of about 65. And so that's pretty significant. I think the closest hotel on that list that we're tracking, we have Hilton. Hilton would score about a plus 25. So that's a huge discrepancy, at least in our score. And this is just one of those things where we think this is definitely one to watch, or at least one to put on your radar, because we're seeing a lot of consumer momentum.
All right, great stuff here. So based on that first chart that you have on consumer purchase intent and where the stock is, pretty positive here on Airbnb. All right, great stuff as always, Megan. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks, guys. You too.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio, joining us, giving us the positive sentiment data on Airbnb.